Blog Talk Radio.
I always got to wait for that Blog Talk Radio. You guys know that who've been with us for 14 years. The 14 years we've been on the air. How many times have I started into the show and then Blog Talk Radio cuts into what I say, so I always wait. But good morning, good Saturday morning to you. The first awesome Saturday in April 2019. I want to start with this thought before I introduce the show and our awesome guest to you this morning. And the thought is from Paulo Coelho, there is only one thing that makes a dream impossible to achieve: the fear of failure. There is only one thing that makes a dream impossible to achieve: the fear of failure. Just something for you to chew on as you go through your day and work to make whatever your dreams are come true. And if you're looking to sell more books, you definitely came to the right place, for our guest today has specialty in that area. So that's one dream. You can let go of that fear. Hopefully, if you do have that fear of failing, like I want to write a book, but I'm not going to write a book because I'm scared that my book won't sell. Hopefully this show will help to alleviate that fear in you, so you may go on to realize that one dream. And I want to tell you guys before we go any further, there is still time for you to reach out to your family, your friends, your colleagues, your neighbors, and tell them to tune in to Off the Shelf Radio right now. It's 11 o'clock, and we are going live. The dial-in number is 347-994-3490. Again, that's 347-994-3490. You've been here with us for 14 years. You know the guests we've brought and how blessed you've been. Share that with somebody. Don't let somebody else miss out. And all you got to do is tell them to dial 347-994-3490, or they can come in via the link to Off the Shelf. If you search Denise Turney Off the Shelf, it should come right up at the top. You can tune in via the chat room, or we got people who log in via iTunes. There's so many ways that people connect to Off the Shelf Radio, but our guest hasn't started yet, so you won't miss anything if you catch the show right now. So I want to welcome you again to our April the 6th show this morning. Before we go any further, how good of a mystery sleuth are you? Are you good at figuring out who did it? The author has presented either there's a murder that took place, something's happened in this story. Who is responsible? And as you get to witness the characters, their motivations, the things that the pluses, the things that the dark, shadowy part of each character. I wonder who really would be the perfect person to have done that. If that's something that intrigues you on television, you like to watch the shows, the murder mysteries, or for me, like the Columbos, the Agatha Christie's. I'm trying to think of the other shows. Somebody told me about another one that came out years ago, and I can't think of the title of it. But these are very popular TV shows, so a lot of people are interested in who done it. How can I figure out who did it or why they did it? If that interests you, but even more if you value relationships. You like to see how we influence and impact each other. There's a complicated father and son relationship in this story. The father has untreated alcoholism. The son is very gifted as an athlete, and he's also academically gifted. He gets a scholarship from several schools, but which school is he going to? It's going to impact his future. When he does get to college, he meets his soulmate. And that's something a lot of people don't believe in. Sometimes I don't, but they are really meant to be together. And his name is Raymond, and her name is Brenda. What else does he meet in college? 4 friends, and one of them is involved in his murder mystery. If you value mystery and relationships, I really, really encourage you to get a copy of Love Pour Over Me right now. You can get it in ebook or in print form. Amazon, Walmart, there's just so many different places that you can get Love Pour Over Me. If you don't see it, just ask the bookseller, can I get a copy of Love Pour Over Me by Denise Turney? and they can get you a copy because it's carried by the largest book distributors in the world. So please get a copy and let me know how you enjoy Love Pour Over Me. And now let us go and meet our very special off-the-shelf guest. And this morning, our guest for Off the Shelf is Liz Lawless. Now, Liz comes from a long line of independent, gritty women. When I was doing the research, I said, wow, look, she's got that in her blood. Her mother opened a Christian bookstore in 1972, and she is the fourth Elizabeth in her family. So let me go back, 1972. It's 2019. Women are doing a lot of things, leading nations, and we always could do these things. But in 1972, it wasn't as many women operating their own businesses, and her mother opened a bookstore in 1972. So she's the fourth Elizabeth in her family, and she has been an Amazon #1 selling author twice. She is the owner of Lawless & Company, a creative media and event management firm located in Dallas, Texas. And to date, Liz has published 7 books. The titles of some of her books are your bestseller book, Creative Monster, How to Study the Bible and Building Brain Power, Firing Up Both Brains to Solve Problems and Get Results. We encourage you to visit Ms. Liz Lawless online at lizbookcatalyst.com, and I'm going to spell that LizBookCatalyst.com. Let's give Liz a warm off-the-shelf Books Talk Radio. Welcome to Off the Shelf, Liz.
Thanks, Denise. I appreciate it so much. It's really exciting to be here, and this is a really great birthday gift, too. This is my birthday week, so great way to celebrate my birthday, having a conversation about books. I always want to talk about books with people.
Well, happy birthday, and we're glad to have you here. Now, the first few questions I'm going to ask you, Liz, I ask every guest on Off the Shelf because our listeners like a little backstory on our guests before I launch into questions about their books and other projects they might be undertaking. So to begin, can you tell Off the Shelf listeners where you grew up and what life was like for you growing up?
Well, I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and as you say, life was really good for me. I grew up in a small community just outside Dallas, Texas. My dad was a coach and a teacher over at the high school, and as you mentioned earlier, my mother was a secretary at first, and then she decided she wanted to open a Christian bookstore, and so books were always a big thing for me. I always loved the library. I was a big reader. I wasn't a writer, which is really kind of interesting that I'm in the writing business now, but I was always a reader. And then when my mother opened the bookstore, obviously I had access to books, 24/7 pretty much. And so books were always a big thing. I grew up in a small community with friends. I had 6 or 7 friends that I'm still friends with today. We knew all our neighbors. We ran up down the streets. We played games. We played hide and seek. We went in and out of everybody's house. And it was just a great way to grow up. And I really regret that our kids today don't have some of that we had.
And you know what? That is so true. And I've heard other people say the same thing. It's going to so much technology that kids don't almost go outside and play and develop those relationships the way they used to, but we can still encourage our kids to do that. Now, my next question, I'm always interested in what the guests will respond with. When you were a kid, like you said, you really didn't, like your mother was, she had her own bookstore, and it doesn't seem like either one of your parents actually wrote. But what did you dream of becoming when you were a little girl? What did you say, this is what I want to be?
Well, I really wanted to be a dancer in the chorus line of all things, isn't that really funny? And so I guess that was my main thing. And then, I don't know. I was always a good organizer. I was always a party planner because, I got along with everybody. I didn't have arguments and fight with people or chase other people's boyfriends or any of that kind of thing, And maybe it was because my dad was a coach, so I was always kind of the best buddy with everybody because all of the guys played, baseball or football with my dad, and I had an older brother, he was kind of a popular guy, and so everybody liked him, and so it was funny. But that's what I wanted to do. And then when I was in college, I really wanted to write for magazines. I really liked magazines, but I was in Dallas, Texas, and I went to school in East Texas at Stephen F. Austin, then came back to Southern Methodist University, got my master's. But they didn't really have publishing down here. It's certainly not magazine publishing. All of the big publishers were in New York and Chicago, and I really just couldn't see traveling because my grandfather had died, and I wanted to spend some time with my grandmother. And so I ended up staying here in Dallas and got in the advertising business. And so that's kind of how it started. But an interesting thing is I took a class with my mother just for fun over at the junior college, and it was a writing class. It was a creative writing class, and that's actually how I got into the writing business. Even though I was a journalism major at school, I ended up in journalism and graduated with a degree in journalism and speech. But it was that was my kind of my introduction, was a creative writing class at the community college of all things. So you can start anywhere.
Wow. Yes, and and then your advertising background. I'm listening to you talk, and it sounds like your path was being mapped out. Whether you, at least this far, whether you might not have been aware of it when you think about the topic. You went into advertising and journalism, and so you know how contacting media and how to do that. It just seemed like it was all working together. Now, how old were you when you knew you were certain that you wanted to be a writer?
Well, when I took this class, I wrote this creative monster story, and that was the first book I wrote. And the instructor said, I think you could sell this as a children's book. This is really interesting. And what's funny is it was the most uncomfortable thing I'd ever written. And I'd written a lot of news stories because I worked for the college newspaper for 3 years, and I wrote stories, every week. And so that's how I really started writing, but it was factual journalism writing, and I was really struggling with creativity, and could I do creative writing or spiritual writing, because that was kind of where I was leaning. But I wrote this little book, and she said, I think you could send this out, and I was just stunned. And I said, well, I was really uncomfortable, and she said, that's why it's better than you think it is. So when you're uncomfortable with things, you got to learn to live with that, and as you get older as a writer, you learn to do that. But new writers don't know that. They think, oh, well, it's not any good. Well, no, maybe it's better than you think it is. And so, we got to not make those judgments early on. But I sent it out to 47 publishers because this was in 1989, so years ago. This was before any online internet existed. The only way you could do was traditional publishing, and they had these wonderful books that had a list of all the publishers, Writers Market. They still have those books. You can go and look up all the publishers and find out if you're in a particular genre. And those are in the library, and I'm sure it's online now and everything. But I sent out 47 letters to different people, and I got, you got it, 47 rejections. And so it just stabs you in the heart, because you've written this and somebody liked it or thought it would be good, send it out. And everybody rejects you. And I got letter after letter after letter that said, thanks but no thanks. But there were 2 or 3 that said, it's different, we like it, we're just not buying anything right now. If you end up self-publishing, contact us, we'll put it in our catalog or whatever. And so, so I put it away for 2 or 3 years, and I went on with my advertising. I started my advertising business and started hustling clients that way. But one of my clients was the African American Museum in 1992, and here in Dallas, one of the first African American museums in the country, and they were having a children's book festival. And they said, well, you've got a book, don't you? And I said, well, I got a manuscript. I don't have a book. I got a manuscript that got rejected 47 times. And so, but by then I had a advertising company. I had an artist. I had multiple 2 or 3 artists that I worked with. I had a printer. And so I went ahead and self-published. Self-publishing was coming on. It's the very original, those were the early days of self-publishing, and because that was the alternative at the time to traditional publishing, which was always hard to get in, unless you knew somebody. And it still is today. It's the same. It's not any different. But but there's so much more opportunity today. So I think it's a great time for people to publish and to write because, you know, you can find your own audience, which you couldn't do. So I went ahead and published my book, and back then you had to print 5,000 or, you know, to 10,000 books to make it worthwhile to sell, to make any money. That was a huge investment, you know, of $5,000 or $10,000. But then I had distribution. I was like, whoa, books, how am I going to distribute? Well, none of the bookstores would talk to you because you're self-published, and I only dealt with traditional publishers. So the only way to sell it was to sell it myself, and which I actually ended up doing. And so I've been self-publishing since 1992. So, and the book business has changed a lot and stayed the same a lot. Sorry.
You know, you are a go-getter. I'm listening to you. You know what? It takes that. You got 47.
Oh, it does.
And you just kept going. You just kept going, and you just kept going, and trying different things. Because, man, if you let a setback or rejection stop you, you're in trouble in this world if you let that stop you. You just kept forging ahead. I wanted to ask you, when your mother owned her bookstore, I can only imagine the impact that had on you. How long did she have the bookstore, and did she bring you in there with her, like to help do things? How old were you when she had the bookstore, when you first came in, to see how much of an impact it had on you? And did you go in and help greet customers and do different things?
Yeah, sure. I was probably about 11 or 12, and so so you know, all through my you know, middle school, high school days, and like I say, because we lived in a small community, and my dad was a coach. I mean, we couldn't go anywhere that, you know, we couldn't go out to eat on Sunday or anywhere without seeing somebody that knew my dad or knew my mother, because people came in the store all the time, and there were probably 20 or 30 churches kind of in this one little community where we lived, and, you know, but you had to drive downtown to get to a bookstore because there was only one or two, you know, bookstores at that time in our community, and even though it was Dallas and it was a, you know, fairly large city at the time, but yeah, so I would go up and I would sit and read the books and, you know, and the shelving and inventory and all that kind of stuff. We had to count it back then, you know, you had to count all the books. You didn't have those scanners like now. You just scan the book, you know, and it goes into the computer. You know, we had to do all that by hand. And so there were, you know, my mother bought from, you know, probably 50 different publishers, and she had these big catalogs. So we had a whole shelf in the back, in the office area back at the back, and had all the catalogs for all the publishers, you know, that published books. And so I was always looking through those. And so I'm sure that had more of an impact than I realized, you know, until you just asked me the question that, you know, I had access. And that's an important thing, too. You know, especially for information and knowledge, the more access you have, the more opportunity I think that gives you. And so that's why we need to offer opportunity to our children. That's why we need to encourage them to read, go to the library, to tell stories. And one of the things we do is we tell kids, go to the oldest person in your family and ask them to tell you the stories that their parents and grandparents told them. And then they get the history because, see, they told their own stories. They told the family stories. They told the stories of the community or the heroes in the communities. And it might have been an Uncle John or an Aunt Mary or whoever. But what happens is years go by, we start to lose those stories because there's only one family historian. And that person has all the family stories and all the letters or all the documentation or all the photos. And then that person dies off, and then nobody knows anything about anything, you know. So we try to encourage children, especially younger children, you know, to do that so that they have that connection to their past, because that's another thing we're losing. You know, we're losing that connection to our heritage and our past, and everybody's heritage and past is important, and our stories are important.
No, and I so agree. There you go. I so agree. And, you know, we got the 23andMe, and that's one way you can find out, oh, my God, they take you way back. And I haven't done that, but I know some people who have, and they're always shocked at some of the findings. Right. But then again, as you share your oral history, which across cultures, that was just something that was done. You just did it you shared your oral histories, and like you said, we're losing track of that. But hopefully, with this some emphasis on genealogy, that maybe that will come back again, because we learned through 23andMe that somebody 5 generations ago was dealing with. Somehow it's back, and we're dealing with it, whether it's in our health or some other kind of way. So it is important. Now, what inspired you, Liz, to write your bestseller book, 5 Steps to Quicker Publishing Success? What made you want to write that particular book?
Well, I had always published for myself, and as you know, I had published my own books, but I never really had helped other people publish. And I had a friend who was a doctor who really got taken advantage of by one of the vanity presses, by hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I was really kind of mad about that. And he had 4,000 books, in his garage, and he was like, Liz, I got these 4,000 books. I don't know what to do with them. He was brilliant. He was a brilliant kidney specialist, of all things, doctor, but he didn't know anything about publishing. And all he did was ask around, and people taught him to go to these people, and, they charged him $50,000, $60,000 or whatever, and he had 4,000 or 5,000 books. And I guess they sold 1,000 of them. They did him a party and a book signing, and they got him 1 review. And I said, are you kidding me? I was just so stunned. I couldn't, and I got so mad about it. I started helping him, and that's kind of how I got into helping other people publish in the last 5 or 6 years here. So, and then I had a client a friend called me from California that said, I got to be on stage in February. This was at Christmas. I got to have a #1 best-selling, ebook. Can we do it? Luckily, she had the book written. She just hadn't published, and I said, well, sure we can. I had no idea if we could do it or not, but, I'm all about saying yes and figuring out how. That's the space we live in. Let's do it. Any challenge, let's take it on. So we actually did. We went to #1 in 10 hours, and I about fainted. She about fainted, and she had a fairly good following because she had been on. She was promoting social media and how to be basically how to be a known, make yourself known in social media, and that was what her book was about. And so she posted on a regular basis, and she had a following, an audience, and but it was an exciting time, and that showed me that we could do it. And I didn't really kind of know how. Then I had to back it out and figure out how it worked, and so I spent a year or 2 doing that. And then I met she was on stage, and she said, my publisher and I helped me do this, and 2 or 3 people came up to her afterwards and said, who's that publisher you were talking about? And one of the ladies told me, and she was a weight loss. Her husband was a bariatric surgeon in Virginia, one of the best in the country, and they were going to want to do a series of books about weight loss because they kept having to answer the same question, over and over again. And so they thought, well, if they put it in a book format and gave it out as a book, that would just solve a lot of their, initial problems or questions with people. And so we started working together. We took their 3 books to #1, and then she and I kind of began to partner on things because she likes the marketing and the technology piece of it, and I'm more of the layout, the formatting, the uploading, the editing piece of things. And so it was a nice partnership, and we said, we need to put something together for people that answers some of those initial questions for them, because we found that the biggest thing that people's problem they had was defining who their audience was. Everybody, they thought the book was for everybody. Mm-hmm. And when you're writing fiction, it can be for more people, but when you're writing nonfiction, which is what we kind of focus on, your audience, your book is not for everybody. The more you can target the person that will buy your book, the better off you are. And most people write the book, and then they think about who they're going to sell it to. That needs to be the very first question, especially, if, like you say, in nonfiction. In fiction, it's not quite as necessary, but it still is. You need to really determine if you're writing for men or for women, because they hang out in different places, And so once you get to the marketing standpoint, and they think in different ways too, obviously. And so you've got to if you can find that person and write to that person, create that avatar, that audience person, that one person that you, and they tell you the same thing in speaking, find that one person to speak to, and then it's more of a relationship and a conversation. But that's the thing that people forget to kind of do is who's their ideal, IDEAL, the ideal audience person that needs your book. who can your book help the most? And for us as writers, if one person gets something out of the book or what we wrote, we're happy. Most of us don't care about selling millions of dollars. I mean, we'd like to. We'd like our books to make money, and we'd like to get repaid for the time and energy and efforts that we spent. But if a lot of us are writing because we want to help somebody else. We're sharing our story because we think that hopefully it'll help somebody else because we experienced something, and it can be a positive something or it can be a negative something that we've come through. But if we can help share that and it helps somebody else, then that's the heart and soul thing of it for people, I think, for us. And if you're writing fiction, it's entertainment, and the people need that too. We especially need that today with, as you talked about, technology and the stress and the bombarded by all this the stuff that we're bombarded with every day. We need a break, and reading helps us do that. Mysteries and thrillers and romance or science fiction or whatever it is. If you've got a desire to do that, we encourage you to do it. Pick up the pen and start writing, or get your computer and start typing. I still write longhand.
Wow.
Impressive.
Impressive. I was going to ask you, and you sort of alluded to this question when you were responding to the previous question, but I was going to ask you, is your bestseller book, 5 Steps to Quicker Publishing Success, I was going to ask you, is it geared toward fiction or nonfiction books? And can somebody who writes fiction benefit from what you share in the book?
I think they can, and certainly the publishing and the marketing is kind of the same. The characterization and all of that, and the story writing, the initial writing piece is different because usually when you're writing nonfiction, you're either doing a system or a process or factual things or step-by-step kind of thing for how somebody does something to be successful or achieve a better result, whether that's their health or their finances. So when you're writing fiction, you like you say, you've got to have plot, you got to have character, you got to have those peaks and those opportunities for the reader, to get interested, to be figuring it out with you, to be wondering where the story is going. And so the writing piece is different, but when it comes to publishing, the formatting is, maybe a little bit similar. I mean, if you're writing a children's book, you've obviously got illustrations and text, whereas a lot of times with a fiction book, you've just got text. But you got to format the same if you're selling on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or iBooks or Apple or any of the other platforms. They have a certain format they want it in. So that formatting is the same. The uploading is the same. The setting up an account is usually pretty similar. And today, on most platforms, you can create a free account. You can upload your work for free, and most of them will take a percentage on the back end if it sells. So that's another reason why I think it's the greatest time to publish, because it's so much easier than it used to be. Obviously, when I started, you had to lay it out, you had to send it to a printer, you had to print multiple copies, then you had to try to figure out how to sell those copies. You still have to do the marketing piece. And I think the marketing things in our book, 5 Steps, will, there's stuff about media, there's stuff about book signings, or there's some different marketing strategies that we've used that have seemed to work for people. The bad news is there's not one thing that works for everybody. We've been looking for that one thing that works for everybody. And there's really not, because, like you say, it's a different audience and a different person that's purchasing that book based on what the book's about and the genre and stuff. So I think those two things, creating your book, publishing, and then marketing, I think those would be helpful. And we talk about conquering fear. You mentioned it at the very first, that fear keeps people from moving forward. And so what we try to encourage people to do is take one action, sit down and write for 10 minutes every day if you can, or an hour every week, or, take a couple hours off or a half day off once a month and just sit down and either outline or write or journal, however you do it, because we all do it differently. I mean, because I come from a journalism background, I don't have a blank page. There's no such thing in my life as a blank page. I never have writer's block because I can always say who, what, when, where, how, why.
Right.
That's how journalism writing starts. My friend, my partner Carol, published with me. She likes to go off for the weekend, and just take a couple of days and write everything she can down that she can think about, and research, and she pulls all the research together and takes that with her, and then she writes it all, and then she starts editing. So everybody does it different. And my doctor friend that I was talking about earlier, he did actually MySpace post, if anybody remembers that.
Yeah. They still have it around too.
To social media, and I know because you've been in this for 14 years, so but some people don't remember that there was a MySpace, and that's what he was doing. He was actually posting stories about the hospital. He was an ER physician, and his book is called ER Confessional. So and everybody always wanted to hear the stories, from the ER, and so he was posting those stories. So he just took his series of blog posts, basically what we would consider today blog posts, and put them together as a book. So there's lots of different ways that you can write. And you don't have to be a great writer today. I mean, I really hate to say that, but if you don't feel like you're a great writer, you can interview other people and put that together as a book. Or you can, if you don't like to sit down and write, you can record. You can do a radio show, or you can do a podcast, or you can do a YouTube channel. That's a lot scarier to me. Being on a video camera is weird, man. Being on a video camera is a lot weirder, harder for me than, being on the radio show or just standing up in front of 10,000 people and talking. Yeah, I can do that all day long, but put that video camera on me and I like a deer in the headlights. I like to freeze up. So we all have our idiosyncrasies and our fears, but don't let that stop you. If whoever's listening today, if you want to write books, it's a great time to be a writer. It's not easy, and you're not going to get rich overnight. It's a process. Writing this journey in the book business is a process, and you have to enjoy the journey. Enjoy the writing piece of it, and then the publishing. And you always make more money if you sell yourself. I mean, you're going to make online, most people take 30, 40%. You make the difference, but you also have to take out the price if it's a printed book. You have to take out your production costs first, and then you split what's ever left after that. But you can usually purchase a book for $3 or $4, maybe $5 or $6 if it's got color photos, if it's a children's book or a photography book, for instance, or a few more. But you can turn around and sell that book for, $7, $10, $15, $20, and you just make more money when you try to sell yourself. But a lot of writers don't like that. The marketing is the booger. It's the boogeyman.
Oh, yes, if you self-publish, that's all on you. Even if you go through a traditional publisher, writers say more and more of it is still on the writer, unless you're a Stephen King, or you got to be a huge name before the publisher will take on the bulk of that. You still have to know how to market, which leads me to this, Liz. This is something you talk about in your bestseller book. How does a writer discover his book's purpose, and in a way that not only for nonfiction but for fiction writers too? Because even a novel would serve a purpose, I'm sure. How does a writer, if that's a key component to taking your book to bestseller status, how does a writer discover what the purpose of his or her book is?
Well, in the section we talked about the audience, you got to think of how somebody is going to be searching for that book, or why they would be looking for something. And so, as you talked about the book earlier, Love to Pour Over Me, if somebody's looking for something about alcoholism, or they're looking about surviving, trauma or alcohol or abuse or whatever that might be. I mean, those are the key words and things that you need to put in your marketing. Those are the you need to write that somehow into your copy so that when somebody searches for that, it comes up in the back end. You know, it's called search engine optimization. The same thing for a number one bestseller. The way we take people to number one is we look at their book, we go in and we figure out, you know, who the competition is. There are different categories on Amazon especially, and bestseller markets too. They have different categories, and so you have to find, there's usually a overall like a big category, and then there are subcategories. So for instance, for fiction, like you say, if you're writing mystery might be, and suspense might be the big category, but under that you might have police detectives or private investigators or military or, you might have those different subcategories, and your book might fit better into that. If you've got a policewoman, who's solving the crime in your book, who's the main character in your book, then you would want to include your book in that category, because Amazon allows you like two main categories and then some subcategories. And so that's how you get further up. You obviously have to sell some books too, but it's interesting. You might have to sell 50 books, or you might have to sell 200 books or 500 books. If you're in weight loss, that's a huge category, so you may have to sell 300 or 400 or 500 books to get up in the top 5 or 10. If you're a children's book and you're writing about animals and you're writing about dogs who are teaching kids, values, like how to share, and you've got two little dogs that are talking about how to, why you should share with your friend who lost his money or lost it, can't have pizza because he lost his money on the playground or something. I mean, that's kind of just a theme type thing. That might only need to sell, 50 books because there's not as many books in that category at any given time. Does that make sense, or am I just confusing?
No, and that
audience,
is the thing. No, that is the thing with Amazon. Anybody who's sold or marketed a book and checking their stats and analytics can see how you can jump if you sell just 10 books, and then like you say, some categories don't have as many books, so you wouldn't have to sell as many copies to go higher up in the ranking.
Right, to go higher up in the list, exactly. And once you rank, and the other bad thing is it comes and goes too, and it changes every hour, every couple of hours. So that's the bad news too. You have to kind of be watching, or if you're launching your book or you're first promoting your book and putting it out there, you can be number one and not even know it, because if you're not looking at it during the time frame, it can roll up or down because it's a continual moving object kind of thing. And as new books come in every day, they move up down the scale. And as somebody promotes that really big, if it's a big publisher. And you can do that too. You can look and see who's number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I recommend people do that. You should go in and see who your competition is, or the genre you think you want to write in, and find similar books. Everybody always says, "Well, my book's different than everybody else's book," or "There is no competition." Well, no, that's not true. I mean, if you're writing. If you're writing a kosher cookbook, you may have less competition if you're writing a keto cookbook right now, because that's the big thing. And so there's thousands of books in that cookbooks in that area. But, there's some, even if it's another cookbook, if it's Julia Childs or Jacques Pepin or any of these other people that are on TV, they're your competition, even though they're kind of not. Even if your book is not exactly like that, somebody that's looking to buy a cookbook is looking to buy a cookbook. And in their mind, if they're looking to buy a kosher cookbook, then they're going to, and you've got kosher in your, language or in your title or your subtitle especially, and that's kind of what we recommend you do. You have your main title, which is kind of short, and then you can always add kind of a subtitle that has some of those key words in it about what people are doing. Now, that's harder with fiction. I mean, it's much easier with a nonfiction book. It's harder with a children's book or with a fiction book. But you need to start building your following now. If you're writing your book and you're not going to publish for 3 months or 6 months, you need to start either posting about it or you need to kind of start an email, or you need to, send a note to people and say, I'm writing this book, I'm looking to publish in 6 months or in December, September. If you give yourself a deadline and you tell somebody else about it, what do? You're much more likely to accomplish that because you told somebody.
Yeah.
You got to be careful who you tell, because there are a lot of people close to you that will try to talk you out of it, and that's what's the real shame. The real shame is that the people close to us are sometimes the biggest negative influence in our life when we want to do something that's a big dream. We talked about dreams earlier, and that's certainly true. First, you got to have that dream to write, and you got to have that dream to publish. You got to have that dream to want to be a bestseller. And if you have that fire, then you won't let other people keep you from doing what you want to do, and that's what you got to do. You've got to be your own best cheerleader, I guess, is the best way to say that. And you can't, because people are really trying to protect you. They really don't. Most people don't mean it in a bad way. They just don't want you to get hurt, or they just don't want you to be disappointed. They also don't, they also think you might change. And you might leave them behind, and you might not be their friend anymore. You might not, whatever it is. We all have those things whirling around in our mind that that inhibit us, which we got to get rid of. We just got to overcome. We just got to say thanks, appreciate you sharing that, but no, I'm going to do this. And you take one creative action, some action. You call somebody. You go to a writer's conference. You listen to a podcast with Denise Turney that's talking about books, or whatever that one thing. You do one thing to get you through the challenge or through the limitation, and then you can go on to the next thing. So you just like they say, writing is wonderful. It's a wonderful life. It's adventurous. You got to look at it as an adventure and a journey, and not get caught up in one small thing, or one big thing. But you got to surround yourself with other writers or other authors or people who want to achieve a similar dream, because you may not have somebody in your immediate circle that wants to do the same thing you want to do. And so if you go, outside that circle and find that one or two people or somebody that you can talk to who's encouraging you, and you need a couple of those people, and, we call them kind of the inner circle, and, a couple of those people that will be that, person that when you're down, they'll say, no, you can do this. Just keep going. One of the things that we do have in our book is we have like a checklist. So we have a writing checklist, we have a marketing checklist, a publishing checklist, and so it's a series of like 10 questions that you can ask yourself, about, what you're doing. And one of those things, I was just going to read a couple of things for the marketing checklist, because like you say, that really is, you can figure out the writing piece, you can easily figure out the publishing piece, but it's the marketing piece. So you need to develop a budget. That's a critical thing that most, I think, writers and publishers don't do, is, create some kind of a budget for your publishing project, and that needs to maybe have some writing, things, some publishing, and some marketing. The writing's going to be maybe an editor. You really got to have a good editor. You can't. I don't edit my own stuff.
Yeah, don't forgo that one.
You send your stuff out.
Yeah, work with a professional editor.
Is key. Probably book design is another key thing, just because it's going to have to go up and down. It's going to have to scale. When you see it on Amazon, it's going to be like a postage stamp. So if you got a whole bunch of copy, or you've got you've got a lot of detail in the background, it may be harder to see, because most people think you're going to see a book, 7 by 9 or 5.5 by 8.5, or trade size published, like a trade size book. Well, the problem is on the screen, sometimes it's not going to be that big. Eventually it will. It's on it. It'll open up, and you can make it bigger. But, maybe a graphic designer or a formatter on the publishing end, or somebody that can help you, upload it to all your platforms, maybe a technical person. You're going to need a website. It doesn't have to be a big website. It doesn't have to be fancy, but you're going to need a basic website because you want to be able to send people to a place where they can connect with you. And if you're not doing a lot of social media, then you got to have a website. If you do social media, if you're on a Facebook or an Instagram or a YouTube, whatever it is, you don't maybe need it as well, but you still want the website because you always make more money if you sell yourself versus selling through other people. And that other platform can go down at any time, and then you don't have any control over, you and I don't control Amazon. We don't control Barnes & Noble. We don't control, Smashwords. They could go out of business or they could get bought out by a competitor who shuts it down. And then you've got nothing, you're just hanging out there. So we always recommend that people get at least their own website in their name or the book name or the book title or something. And you should do title searches, too, because people come up with great titles and they think nobody else thought of it. But guess what?
This is true.
There's probably somebody else out there that has a similar name.
There you go.
And
you said it.
So you got to check, you got to check that, and you got to and not be locked in with the very first thing, because that's another creative thing. That's the book I have about building brain power is all about letting the creative thoughts flow and writing down 20 or 50 or 100 thoughts or titles, and then coming back and and editing it down and filing it down and seeing if somebody else has it, and because our first. A lot of times we think our first thought is our best thought, but it's really not, because our mind has to get into action. It has to get into that creative flow, and once you get into that creative flow, things begin to, more thoughts come, and when you think about this, it connects to that, and then all of a sudden you've got something new. And so that's the mind just works that way, and it needs input. And so, you should also look in other areas. Just because you're not to gardening or automotive or outdoors or cooking or whatever, it doesn't mean that you can't find a nugget in that area and convert it over to what you are doing. So the budget is a big thing that people don't think about. And then you obviously got to market, budget some money for marketing. It may be $200, it may be $2,000, just depending on what kind of genre you're in and what kind of market you're in. You need to identify some resources and start that now. Are you going to need a graphic designer? Are you going to need an editor? Are you going to need a publisher? Are you going to need somebody to help you with a website? Are you going to need, and if you go to like chamber meetings or club meetings or writers meetings, you meet those people and you take their card and keep their card, because you might not need them today, but maybe 3 months from now when you're finished writing, you go, oh, I need that person. Where's that card? Oh, I met that person back at that meeting, and I don't remember their name, or it was, her name was Liz, and she did publishing, but how am I going to find her now? Well, if you had my card, or you had, had a conversation with me, and went immediately home and put it in your file, and said, I'm going to contact. You'd be able to do that.
There's something you said I really piggybacking on having a budget, and then when it comes to marketing, do some research before. At the very top of the show, you talked how you got involved. You had a friend, he was in surgery, and he paid all this money for like 40,000 or 4,000 copies of books, and then he's left sitting after he sells 1,000 books with all these books. So really do your research before you pay money for a printer if you're going to self-publish, because you can get ripped off there, and I know of people who have been. But do your research and talk to other writers, and that's where going to the writers' conferences, and you start talking to people and asking them for recommendations and suggestions, and then doing your online research before you start spending money on different companies. Like I tell people, a literary agent won't charge you a fee to read your work. There's certain things that people who are on the up and up, they won't charge you fees for them. You won't get these exorbitant fees or charges to do something that a professional person would do for free. So do your research, and that's a good benefit for going to writers' conferences, especially when you're starting out. But there was something else you said. You said get your own website because we don't control Amazon. We don't control Barnes & Noble. And I would recommend even beyond that, keep your own, like, contact list. Whether you start a newsletter and you have contacts in it, you have people's names, their email address. When you go to events and you sell your books, have a sign-up sheet so they can sign up to get your newsletter, their name, their email address. Because what would you do if Twitter didn't shut down, but they told you we don't want you can't come back on, or Facebook told you can't. Well, then you don't have no way to reach all those people that you were reaching. So make sure you keep your on contact list as well. We are coming down to 10 minutes, and I have so many questions I want to ask you. But can you share? No. Can you share steps, Liz? You've given so much good information. So, and I hope that our listeners may go back and listen again and take notes the second time they listen to what you share. But can you share 3 steps to building a book marketing team? How do you build a book marketing team?
Well, and I think that's an interesting thing too, because you're seeing that a little bit more. You see a lot of. That's one of the other things is find those 5 or 10 people that will help you promote your book. It may be another author that you meet and y'all can cross promote. It may be somebody in a different genre in a complementary place. But you got to do that ahead of time. You can't wait till the week you're publishing your book or you're launching your book and call somebody and say, "Oh, would you email this to your list?" Well, no, they've got their own business that they're running, their own program, and they've got to have time to feed it in. So one of those things we would recommend, like you say, 3 months, 6 months, even 12 months out, is start finding those connections, those people that either like you or like what the subject matter or have some affinity for the subject matter you're talking about that would be willing to share. And you just ask them. You just have to ask, would you be willing to send an email to your list when I promote my book, in 6 months? I'll send you the link. I'll send you the information. And, if you would help me promote that, I'd be glad to do the same for you, And you got to have something to kind of give back to. I mean, you got to be willing to do something for them. They might not want you to do an email. They might want you to just introduce them to somebody that you know. And so if you can do that ahead of time and start to make that list, like you say, and especially to have some kind of consistent communication, even if it's a newsletter once a month or it's a post once a week or whatever, but you always got to drive, ask people to share their email if they're interested. You're not going to send them something every day. You're not going to spam them. You're not going to sell the list. But if they're a friend or they're interested in what you're doing and they'd like to be on your list, you got to ask for that too. And it's amazing. We just expect people to do things. Well, people aren't going to just do things. They're just too busy. They've got their own agenda. They've got their own life going on. And unless you say, bye today, or, will you do this for me a month from now, or whatever, it is, they're not going to do it. So team, I guess, is what it used to be called. You used to have a street team, and they would go out and put flyers out, on all the cars in the park. That's how we did events for years, and they still do that. But, so it's kind of your online street team. Get those 4 or 5 or 10 people that will help you promote your stuff when the time comes. And it may be your graphic artist, it may be your web person, it may be your publisher. I mean, you're going to have those 2 or 3 people maybe, but find those other 4 or 5 people and develop relationships with them over time and do something for them. It may be an article, or, they may be writing about something different, and you can, buy their book and put a review up. Reviews always help authors because people do look at the reviews and decide whether they're going to buy. And as you mentioned, look at, find out the information. Go in and search people out. Don't just deal with somebody, because they call you and you think it's a good deal or because you think it's a reasonable deal. always talk to 2 or 3, people, or and always, like you say, get referrals from somebody else, because there are a lot of people that are out there that will take advantage of you. And the second guy we worked with, he got taken advantage twice as much, because he got hardbacks and paperbacks. And then I was really, on fire about helping people because, they were just, you hate to say it, but people will. So you got to protect yourself. You got to be smart. You got to do your research, check things out. You can Google people now. You can, like you say, if you go to a conference and actually meet people in person, I mean, obviously that's always the best way, but you can't always do that, or you can't afford to do that. But you can, go online and type somebody's name in or type somebody's business in and see if any comments come up, good or bad, and make your decision, and that way you make smarter decisions. The more information you have, the better decisions you can make, I think. So I hope
quickly,
that's helpful, but those would be the things, yeah.
Thank you. Quick question. What have you seen as far as marketing where it comes to giving away free books versus just starting to sell your book at its regular price as soon as the book's published? Which would you recommend based on your experience?
Well, we don't do free anymore unless you've got multiple books. I mean, if you've got 2 or 3 books, you're at a conference or something. Like we're going to the Texas Library Conference in a couple of weeks, and so our author that has 4 or 5 children's books or poetry books, I mean, they can afford to give the first one for free, and then people will buy the other books. We started when I was telling you earlier about my friend with the social media. We did free for a couple of days, and then we went to sold for a couple of days. And she actually got 1,000 downloads. Well, if we'd have known better, if I knew what we knew now, we wouldn't have done free. We would have done probably 99 cents or $1.99, and that would have been, a huge discount off the $9.99 regular retail price or the $14.99 price. And people would have bought. She'd have made $1,000 instead of not. And I always like for our people to make money on their books because I know they've spent a lot of time and energy and effort. So I wouldn't do free anymore unless, like you say, you've got 2 or 3 books and you can afford. If you've only got 1 book, you really can't afford to do it for free. But you can do a happy deal for 48 hours, or I wouldn't do more than 2 or 3 days. The only reason I'd do the 2 or 3 days is because not everybody's on every day like we are. If you're in the business, you're on every day. You're on your computer every day. You're on social media. You're on your email. But not everybody is like that. And so sometimes you have to give people a couple of days to see it because they don't see it the first time it comes up. But you can do a special deal for a short period of time and then go to your retail price, especially if you're doing an online. And, same thing. If you've got a book that's $14.99 and you're out of the show, you might sell it at $10 just because that's easy. People, if they have cash, they can just give you the 10 or a 20, do change. If you do $14.99, then you gotta make change. And then if you start adding tax in, you gotta do that. Now you need to add the tax, but you just say the tax is included, and you figure out if that's 83 cents or if that's $1.27. Based on where you live, the sales tax rate is different, and so you just include that in your price. So maybe you do a $15 price, and that includes the tax because it's a $14.99 book, and the tax on it is going to be $1.68 or 28 or whatever. And then you got to keep track of that too, because eventually, if you start to sell enough books, you're going to have to declare that on your taxes, and then you're going to need to pay the sales tax to your local state government because you want to do the right thing. And that's the business of being a writer, and it is a business. And that's the other thing
it
I would say before we end. It's really a business, and you have to look at it as a business and not as a hobby. If it's a hobby, that's great, and you're just writing for yourself and your friends and your family. But if you want to make money, then it's a business. And you want to recover your cost, your investment of your time and energy and your money. then you got to look at it as a business and as a career, as a profession, and you got to treat it as such. You know, you've got to act in a business-like manner. You got to get a business name. You got to get a bank account. You know, at some point you'll have to have a CPA because you include that as income if you make income, and hopefully you will. And certainly if you stick with it and you do take some action every week or every month or every day, you can. You can create a business around your books and around being an author. And it's not easy, and you're going to be discouraged. But so you got to find positive people. You got to find role models and people that, mentors or whatever. And but it's a great life. It's a great adventure. It's great fun. It's probably more fun than anything else I've done, and I've done a lot of things in 30 or 40 years. I know you have too. And we keep doing it. And the reason we keep doing it is because we love it.
That's true. That is true. And it can be challenging, but you do, like you said, you have to stay positive and surround yourself with positive people. But you shared so many tips today, and I thank you on whether you should offer free or discounted book for our listeners, building your street team or your book marketing team, a good time to start marketing. The checkbook that is in Liz's book, building, getting that bestseller book, your bestseller book, 5 Steps to Quicker Publishing Success. There are tips and things in there. Although it's geared more toward nonfiction books, there, as you can tell from listening to Liz here on Off the Shelf this morning, there's information in your bestseller book, 5 Steps to Quicker Publishing Success, that could benefit even a writer of a fiction book, whether you're published with a traditional publisher, you want to go out and market. That's how Terry McMillan got out there. She just started sending postcards on her own. But whether you want to do it yourself or you're self-published, you have to do it yourself. There's tips in there that can benefit you as well. Where can off-the-shelf listeners get copies of your books, Liz?
Well, they could go. Certainly, the easiest way is to go to Amazon.com, and it's Liz Lawless or Elizabeth Lawless, ELIZABETH LAWLESS, as an outlaw. We're all about renegade thinking, and you don't have to spend a lot of money. A small amount of money will get you down the road. But our books are there, our website at lizbookcatalyst.com. I think you mentioned that earlier. That's lizbookcatalyst.com. You can follow me on social media. It's author Liz Lawless. I have a Facebook page, a Twitter page, a LinkedIn page, and then we do events, like you say, throughout. We're in Texas. We're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, so but we do travel around some, and so we put our events on the calendar on our website. So if you go to the website, you can see where we're going to be. We're going to be in Austin in a couple of weeks. We're in McKinney. We're going to be maybe down in Houston. So if you're in those different areas, come see us for sure. Come by and introduce yourself. And I thank you so much for the time today. It's always great to talk with somebody who's an author themselves and who loves books, and I appreciate all you're doing, Denise, to help people who want to follow their dream of being a published author.
Thank you so much, Liz. We have had the pleasure of speaking with Ms. Liz Lawless. She's owner of Lawless and Company, a creative media and event management firm based out of Dallas, Texas. She has events coming up, so encourage you to bookmark her page at LizBookCatalyst.com, LizBookCatalyst.com. And one of the books that we talked about, she actually has several, but it was your bestseller book. That's the one we talked about. She has a checklist in there, and should you offer your books for free or discount, building your street team or your book marketing team, finding your book's purpose. Those are just a few of the things included in her book that we touched on today. So I encourage you to get a copy of that as well, your bestseller book by Liz Lawless. So thank you to Liz and to each of our listeners. For those who came in midstream or you want to get more information about what Liz shared, and you want to take notes, you can go back after the show finishes streaming and go back and listen and take notes on the show. So thank you, Liz, for being with us here today on Off the Shelf Books Talk Radio. Remember, to each of our listeners, you are awesome, you are amazing, you are incredible. Go and create a fabulous day for yourself. See you back here next Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Bye for now, and Liz, I'll shoot you an email.
Thank you.